We officially have on our hands a Mercedes title fight that nobody expected to be this close, this early, or this complicated. After 3 races, Kimi Antonelli sits 9 points clear of George Russell in the Drivers' Championship, and the question that was supposed to be settled by now is suddenly wide open. 3 races into the 2026 Formula One season, the narrative has flipped completely. Before the year began, most people looked at Mercedes, looked at George Russell, and concluded the championship conversation would be a formality. Russell carries the established name, the Australia race win already on his 2026 tally, and the experience of a driver who knows what a title campaign demands. And yet here we are after Suzuka, with his teammate leading the standings and holding a record that Lewis Hamilton could not claim until he was 22. 9 points ahead and making history. Kimi Antonelli is now the youngest driver in Formula One history to lead the World Championship at 19 years, 6 months, and 25 days, beating Hamilton's record set at the 2007 Spanish Grand Prix. No teenager had ever topped the standings before Antonelli did it at Suzuka, and no Italian had led the championship since Giancarlo Fisichella after the 2005 Australian Grand Prix. These are not footnotes to a bigger story. They are the signal that something real is developing inside that Mercedes garage, and it bears no resemblance to the story anyone scripted going into the season. Walking through Sunday's race is the only way to understand how the championship picture shifted so dramatically in a single afternoon. Antonelli lined up on pole position for the 2nd consecutive race, which is itself worth pausing on, because in China he became the youngest pole sitter in Formula One history and then backed it up in Japan by nearly 0.3 of a second over Russell. Factor in the mechanical problem that compromised Russell's qualifying in China and the picture gets murkier, but the Japan result needed no caveats. On pure one-lap pace across 2 consecutive weekends, Antonelli outqualified his teammate cleanly. None of that mattered when the lights went out, because both Mercedes drivers had dreadful starts. Piastri surged to the lead from 3rd on the grid. Leclerc slotted into 2nd, and Norris went around the outside of Russell as the field sorted itself into the first corners. By the time the opening sequence had finished, Antonelli sat 6th and Russell 4th, the front row pair having surrendered their advantage before the race had barely begun. What followed was a Russell recovery that, across the next dozen laps, looked like it would define his entire Suzuka weekend in the best possible way. Norris fell to him on lap 3, Leclerc on lap 4, and by lap 8, Russell had Piastri in his sights and was close enough to attempt an overtake at the final chicane, moving ahead momentarily before the McLaren came back past on the pit straight. A genuine fight for the race lead, and Russell was right in the middle of it. Piastri pitted on lap 18. Russell briefly inherited the lead before making his own stop 3 laps later on lap 21, and that's when everything unraveled. 1 lap after Russell rejoined in 5th place, Ollie Behrman's Haas hit the barriers at the spoon hairpin at 308 km/h, and the safety car came out. Antonelli, provisionally running at the front, having not yet pitted, dived into the pits and emerged with fresh tires in 1st place. Russell, carrying tires 1 lap older than everyone around him, stayed 5th. His radio captured the moment exactly. "Unbelievable," he shouted as the safety car deployed, and then, wow, our luck in these last 2 races. The restart handed Antonelli a controlled run to the flag, crossing the line 13.7 seconds ahead of Piastri. Russell's afternoon continued to deteriorate. Hamilton overtook him at the restart, then Leclerc breezed past in what observers called the easiest overtake of the race. With 3 laps remaining, Russell briefly reclaimed the position at the final chicane, only for Leclerc to sweep back past on the main straight, 4th place. After the race, Russell kept it direct. If it had been 1 lap difference, then it probably would have been a race win. That is frustrating. 1 lap earlier and the safety car helps Piastri far more than it helps Antonelli. 1 lap later and Russell collects a free stop just like his teammate. The margins in Formula One have always been unforgiving, but this was a particularly ruthless swing, producing a championship shift in Antonelli's favor across the last 2 races alone. Stepping back and reading the full 3-race picture gives both drivers a legitimate argument, and the interesting thing is that neither argument is weak. Russell's case rests on consistency and misfortune. Australia delivered the win. China cost him through a qualifying mechanical failure, and the race did not go his way either. Japan had the safety car land at the worst possible moment. The race made this point directly after Suzuka. Without the safety car in Japan or the qualifying problem in China, Russell may well have ended on top in both races. Strip out the bad luck and his season looks very different. That is a legitimate reading of 3 races. But Antonelli's case rests on a different kind of evidence entirely, and it is harder to dismiss. China brought his maiden Formula One victory. Japan brought his second consecutive win, something Russell has never achieved across his entire Formula One career. Back-to-back pole positions sit alongside those results, and after crossing the line in Suzuka, he told his team, "The pace was unbelievable today." The data backed him up. Once Antonelli held the lead on fresh tires after the safety car, he pulled clear of Piastri, the same driver who had contained Russell at the front of the race for 22 laps. That gap told its own story. The starts remain Antonelli's obvious problem, and he has acknowledged them directly. Dropping to 6th from pole at Suzuka, as he did in Japan, is not a sustainable pattern. But the pace, the composure, the back-to-back results, and the youngest championship lead in the history of the sport, none of that reads as luck. The underlying performance across both race weekends was real. Mercedes, as a whole, sits in dominant territory. Their constructors' tally of 135 points leads Ferrari on 90 and McLaren on 56, with the W17 carrying genuine pace advantages across most circuits. But inside that dominant package, the internal title fight has opened up in a way nobody anticipated before the season began. The narrative that Russell would manage 2026 with relative ease, collecting wins while Antonelli developed, has been put under real pressure before Miami, before the calendar has even settled into its regular rhythm. What was expected to be a controlled season for the senior driver now carries the texture of a genuine contest, and the 5-week break that follows Suzuka gives that story room to develop without a race weekend immediately pushing it aside. Bahrain and Saudi Arabia were cancelled due to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, meaning the next round at Miami on 3 May 2026 arrives after an extended pause that keeps Japan's result at the top of the conversation. Miami will tell us whether Suzuka was a turning point or simply a data point in a season that still has most of its races to run. A clean Russell weekend in Florida, the kind of weekend he has been denied twice in a row, resets the narrative somewhat and brings the gap back down. A third consecutive pole or win for Antonelli pushes the conversation further in his direction, and the historical weight of what he has already achieved becomes harder to frame as a young driver simply benefiting from fortune. 9 points is not a crisis for Russell, but 2 consecutive races slipping the wrong way, a teammate breaking records and winning back-to-back for the first time either of them has managed it, and a championship lead now sitting with the youngest driver in the history of the sport. That combination demands a response, and Miami is where Russell needs to start delivering one. Antonelli versus Russell is the real title fight of 2026, and 3 races in, it is already more complicated than anyone expected it to be. Subscribe to Racecraft and hit the bell so you do not miss the next breakdown as this one develops through Miami and beyond.